Hey guys, this is National Master Gopal Menon here with Dynamic Chess Inc. And today we are going to be looking at a game where I beat Magnus Carlsen. That's right. This game was played in the summer of 2016. It was an ICC Open event, and actually, this game has kind of a funny story behind it. I actually didn't know at the time that I was playing Magnus. Basically, what happened was this game was played in a qualifier for the ICC Open. The winner of the qualifier would go on to the knockout phase of the tournament, and this was round 2, I believe. And being one of the higher rated players on that server, my peak rating on ICC was 3163. At the time, I was like 29, 30 something, but I was still one of the higher rated players in the qualifier. So I rated my chances to be pretty decent to qualify. Round 2, I was playing against a player with a blitz rating that was 2257. And so during the game, I looked it up, his profile, and I saw that he had a 2700 3-minute rating. Now, I still had no idea who I was playing, of course, but I sensed that with such a high rating in the 3-minute pool, this person must not only be a grandmaster, but a very strong one at that. Little did I know, it was Magnus himself. So, at the end of the day, I didn't qualify. My opponent, who in the game, his handle was Stop Try Harding, an awesome handle, I would say. He went on to win this tournament. I was the only one to beat him, and he drew Maxim Matlakov. He beat Grishuk. And so in qualifying for the knockout, he was forced to reveal his identity. And so when I logged in to watch the knockout, I got all these messages like, oh, congratulations, this, that, and the other. And I was wondering, why would they congratulate me when I had a mediocre result in the qualifier? But they told me, like, you were the only one to beat Magnus. So let's get right into the game. So the game starts off quietly enough. We have a Queen's Gambit declined, and then here we have a variation of that called the Rosen. It is a hybrid of two of the most solid openings that you can play as black against d4, the Queen's Gambit declined, and the Nimzo Indian defense. And so Carlsen opts for one of the more common continuations with pawn takes pawn. White can do other stuff here like bishop g5, e3 is directly transposing to a Nimzo Indian. Queen a4 check is another move, forcing me to play knight c6. And this is like a totally different can of worms, but instead we enter this structure called the Carlsbad, or it's sort of an offshoot of a traditional Carlsbad. And so here I play h6, challenging his bishop, bishop h4, knight bd7. Now, what I like about this Rosen defense compared to other variations of the Queen's Gambit, like perhaps the more tame move bishop e7, which of course there's nothing wrong with it, just bishop b4 is a bit more active. Like, one of the big reasons why I like it is because due to this pin on this knight, we can already consider starting an early attack with black. Like, for example, g5, bishop g3, and knight e4. So we're attacking this knight, and if white makes a natural move like rook c1 or queen c2 to just simply defend the knight, h5 is going to be a big problem. What I'm threatening to do is h4, attacking the bishop, and if the bishop moves here, we're going to play f6, and that bishop has nowhere to go. Notice that queen a4 check doesn't really help much, knight c6, and white is going to be fishing in some troubled waters here, sooner rather than later. That's why after this, the main move is knight d2, and yeah, I have a choice to either take the bishop. If I try to win a pawn, I might end up regretting this. I have to give the pawn back. If I go here, bishop a5, h4, my bishop is very unfortunately sidelined on the queen side. My king side feels a little bit weak, and even though there is a pin here on this knight, because I have no other pieces into the game, I can't really exploit it. So white has a dangerous initiative here. But yeah, so I played knight bd7, and here Magnus played a strange move, queen a4, or at least strange for me at the time. The other move would be e3, when I could consider playing g5 and knight e4, sort of in analogy to what I did in the previous line. Or I can play c5 with the idea of queen a5 and trying to exploit this pin. A more classical way to play. This was like considered to be the main line of the Rosen until the strength of these g5 and knight e4 ideas were discovered and it became totally mainstream. So queen a4 played, kind of a strange move, and I thought I wasn't really sure what his idea was. I spent some time thinking here because c5 looks so natural that it was difficult to resist, but I just want to see what his idea was. As it turns out, Carlsen had essayed this previously in a game against Mamedyarov, Blitz game from 2014, I believe. And Mamedyarov just played the very passive bishop e7. And Adjestein, a former Carlsen helper, if I'm not mistaken, played this move as well against Topalov, and Topalov played a5. So two elite players, really not with the finger on the correct pulse, but if in their defense they were blitz and rapid games. So anyway, c5, pawn takes. This was his big idea, and so we trade on c3, and after castles, White's position looks kind of suspicious. I mean, he's played this queen a4 move, and I've ruined his pawn structure. He has these double pawns, but remember, one of those double pawns is actually an extra pawn. So White played queen b4, and this was a puzzling position for me because I felt like my position should be very good. My opponent was playing these moves very quickly at lightning speed, suggesting that he was perhaps familiar with this position. And yeah, so I wasn't really sure what to make of it. One of the dangers for Black, though, is that, like, obviously, White has bad pawn structure, and even though they've lost some time with the queen, it's not so easy to exploit. And, I have an isolated pawn here. This could be a potential annoyance for me. Plus, also, even if I regain this pawn, the c5 pawn here, which is White's extra pawn, a lot of times what can happen is White can play e3 and c4, trade these pawns off, and reach a structure where he has 4 versus 3 on the king side, and I have 2 versus his 1 on the queen side. Such an opening in the position would be very suited for the two bishops. And just to show you an example of how things can turn in White's favor, I've selected 2 games. These 2 games were pointed out by Efstratios Grivas in a New in Chess yearbook survey, when Carlsen himself actually used an idea from one of Grivas's books. And so this book was given this game was given in his book Beating the Fianchetto Defenses, because in a certain Grunfeld line, we reach the structure that I've just described. So here, after c5, we reach exactly what I was talking about with this 1 versus 2, and we have the 4 versus 3 on the king side. So Grivas shows this game to show how White can pose some problems in this given structure. So the key plan for him was after rook d1, knight c5, g4 to gain some space. Okay, g4 restricts the black king side, and slowly but surely Vladimir Kramnik in this game against Christopher Lutz made steady progress. A very important factor to understand is that, like, any movement of these pawns will either it will probably induce some weaknesses, but if you're not moving the pawns, you can't really use your majority. So it turns out White's majority is the more potent. Here we have the threat of h5 to either take here and create a pass pawn, or if Black takes, knight f5, the Black kingside structure is getting shattered. So we have b4, and yeah, eventually he won the game with some nice technique. And years later, in 2008, Carlsen used the same type of idea in his game against Pavel Ilyanov. And so, through a totally different opening, we actually reached the same pawn structure. And so, same type of position, but again, this very key g4 idea to squeeze the black king side, and you can see the games that we've shown here in a study. The link will be in the video description. And yeah, Carlsen ground his opponent down in what was to become his trademark style. The reason why I show these games and I'm going off on this tangent is really because I want to give players a glimpse into how masters study chess. You have to study lots of different structures, and sometimes from totally different openings you can reach the same structure. Like, we have two games. One was a Queen's Gambit and one was a Grunfeld, the last two games we've seen. And both are very different, like, stylistic choices. Like, one's very classical, one's very hyper-modern. But it ends up almost boiling down to the same type of position. So that's why it's very important to study pawn structures and plans. That way your understanding of the position spans far beyond the middle game and even into the end game. And so you can make a very nice connection between opening and end game through a complete study like that. I could go on to show how such a structure would be favorable for black, but this is really more of a lecture about my game with Magnus, not so much about this structure. It's just important to study these things, though, because nowadays modern chess is not a fantasy. The information is out there and you have to be willing to dig, study, and work hard. So anyway, I decided here to exploit white's lag in development, or at least attempt to. I would have to play actively, and so that's why I played g5. After g5, bishop g3, knight e4, so I'm threatening to regain the pawn in a very comfortable way. And so bishop d6, he played this move very quickly. I'm not so sure that it's the best move in view of an improvement that I'll show for black later. There are two over the game, and I think there is even stronger than what I did. But okay, we'll leave that to the opening theoreticians. And so I played rook e8. If I take, he'll just recapture, and it's really not so easy to round up that pawn. Like, for example, if I take, it'll take me 1, 2, and then 3 moves to round up that pawn. Meanwhile, white can use that time to consolidate his position in castle and maybe even create some of their own ideas. So I played rook e8. Plus, this move was played with the idea to undermine this bishop with b6. So after e3, attempting to develop, b6, take. And so here I took with the knight. My whole idea connected with b6 was to destabilize the strong bishop on d6. So knight takes seemed logical to gain a tempo against that bishop. However, a take b6 appears to be stronger. This move opens up the rook, and this rook can be very active on the a file, and I will gain a tempo against this bishop anyway. So for example, bishop e2, this is just a sample line, queen f6, tapping the bishop much like I did in the game, but in a much more effective version. Bishop g3. There's also ideas too, like to play knight c5, and if he takes, my pawn structure gets united, and still white is left with these weak pawns. Bishop g3. And rook a4, very nice move. Obviously, if captures, then takes, and white is getting destroyed. And after queen b2, knight c3, this is a very difficult position for white to play. White is lagging in development, and even though they can castle here, I have ideas such as d4. d4 is one move, but the position is very, very promising for black. Of course, there is also like such a straightforward way to play with bishop a6, and maybe even some stronger ways. But so in any case, a take b6 appears to cast some doubt on white's very unorthodox and ambitious idea of queen a4 b4 and this whole bishop d6 stuff. So I played knight take b6, bishop g3, and here I played queen f6 very quickly, but I realized this was a mistake as soon as I played it, and we'll talk about why. Much stronger in order to exploit white's lag in development was the move f5, to really emphasize that white's king is not comfortable in the center. After bishop e2, I can continue blasting open lines with f4, and after pawn takes, bishop a6. Very nice move. Of course, if capture, then I'm winning some material here with knight g3. And if knight d4, strengthening this bishop here, queen c7 is a very nice find. I'm attacking this, or I'm threatening to do this. I'm threatening knight c3 as well. And white's best is to bail out here, to castle and sacrifice some material to get the king safe. And this leads to a position where I'm really not sure what to say about it. I might be dynamically equal, like my king position is a little bit compromised, but white still has poor pawn structure, and yeah, I mean, it's kind of a strange position, but dynamically equal seems like a fair cop-out assessment. One interesting idea I noticed while analyzing this game was the following idea. So this bishop, as you'll see in the game, has trouble finding a good square. We even saw it in this line where it was actually a target and black was able to use it to try to open some lines, the fact that that bishop was sidelined. So white can try the following idea, which is really an inhuman idea if you ask me. Bishop e5. And so if I give him time, the bishop will be very nicely placed on d4. The queen could even go to d4 as well in some cases, and dark squared bishop would be very powerful in the middle of the board. And so it looks like I can just win material with g4, but after bishop f4, this really shows the downside of this move g4. This bishop has a stable square, and if I accept his piece sacrifice, white has two bishops. I have 4 pawn islands. White has 2 pawns for the piece, and after rook g1 followed by bishop d3, this is a winning attack, I believe. The queen will go here to d4, and black is going to be real tied up, and you're going to always be anxious with that rook on the g-file, aiming straight at black's king. So that was a cool computer-like idea that I noticed. But I played queen f6. This was a big mistake, I think, because here Magnus played bishop d3, which is not the strongest move, and we'll see why. But I think from a conceptual point of view, this move is incorrect. Here I'm not really playing so much for the initiative. My initial idea was to just regain the pawn, and after bishop d3 I realized, well, if I simply regain the pawn, after this and white castles, white has 2 bishops in an open position, and black has multiple pawn weaknesses. So this would be no good just to try to regain the pawn. So I had to come up with something else. A stronger move for white, though, was queen d4. So I can't even regain the pawn here, and it's sort of surprising that Magnus missed this very intuitive centralizing move. Such moves I feel like are very typical for his style, but it was a blitz game after all, and yeah, neither of us played perfect. But anyway, bishop d3, and so realizing I had to come up with something special here, I figured, okay, what's his idea? Well, his idea is to castle. Okay, I better prepare a warm reception for his king over there, and so that's why I played the move h5. With the idea of h4, and so Carlsen played bishop c7 in the game. We'll see what happens there. But after castles, the idea of h5 is revealed because I can play h4, and after bishop c7, h3. And at the very least, his king side gets undermined, and in a blitz game, this is enough to cause anybody some sort of anxious moments. So we can see why he wasn't willing to go for that. After bishop c7, I play the move g4, attacking the knight. So the knight can't move because we're going to have mate in 2 with queen f2 and queen d2. So he snaps off the knight, and after rook takes, knight d4, everything looks relatively safe for white. Looks like white's finally ready to castle and consolidate their extra material. And the downside of black's strategy to advance all these pawns, we could see it in that a bunch of weaknesses have been created. That's why I played bishop a6, a very important move, trapping his king in the center. And here Magnus played the move queen d6. And so I played queen g5, which is, I guess, a mistake. To me, I didn't really think about anything else other than this queen g5 move, because his king's in the center. I have a rook on the e file, and rook take e3 is really the only way to try to blast open this position, or maybe if I have time for some knight c4 take e3. But queen d6 doesn't grant me that time, so it just seemed natural for me to move the queen to g5. And so we'll see what happened in the game. But apparently stronger move was rook e6. And this meets the threat on the queen, so if knight take e6, this is devastating for white. And after queen f4, I can play the move knight d7. Such maneuvers are beyond my comprehension in blitz games, and I think in a slow game I would have to be in very good form to see this. I'm not even sure that I would be able to. If white plays, for example, h3, this is just a computer move that I was messing around with. Knight c5, castles, and here we have a bunch of moves for black. We can play knight e4, rook c8. These are not totally clear. But knight d3, there was an interesting line I was looking at here with rook takes, bishop takes, king d2. And if we do this, we have a very sharp position here. And it's worth taking a second to explain what's going on here. One big misconception that less experienced players have when they're learning chess is that positions with opposite colored bishops are just dead equal. That really couldn't be more wrong, especially when there are queens and rooks on the board. Very often, if one bishop is better than the other, or one side is attacking, it would almost be like that side has a extra piece in the attack, because this bishop cannot challenge this bishop, and if this guy is super effective, that's going to be a problem for white. He can't cover the squares that this bishop attacks. So black has some attacking chances here, but the defensive resources that white has shouldn't be underestimated. For example, h take g4, black can try to launch with d4 to go after this pawn, and I mean, this is where stuff gets really crazy. Like, white can try to evacuate like this, and he survives. Both sides have to tread super carefully here. Again, not a complete analysis, but just a sample line. Interested readers can see the study in the video description to explore for themselves. And after queen d4, to stop this d4 try, black can play queen f5, threatening to infiltrate and threatening to take on f2. And white has a very surprising move, e4, to cover f2. And after this, notice that the trading of the queens would completely take away any attacking chances that black has. After d4, king e3. Very strange move just to blockade the black pawn and make sure no lines are getting open. And white is hanging on here, surprisingly. Black is probably to be preferred, but the position is very difficult to play. For example, one direct attempt that I made to try to mess with the engine was after this, and queen g5 check. This looks so obvious, right? Because I'm going to win some material here. But after bishop f4 and rook g3, my queen is banished to f1 temporarily. And even though I'm threatening mate in 1, it's actually white's turn to move. And that means they can land a blow first with rook takes g6. And after queen d5 check, black has to be very careful here to make a draw. I have to play king g7. And after this, I just have to go back like this. And I'm very lucky to be able to make a draw, because after bishop e5 check, I can go here, and white has really nothing better than to force a draw because black is threatening to go on a counterattack themselves. This would just be suicidal, because after a bunch of checks, white can eventually pick up the rook on a8, and yeah, black is lost. So that's why I have to try to force a draw with king g7. And I'm lucky to do so with two pieces attacking my king. Okay, so after queen d6, that was rook e6, the better move. I played queen g5. And here, castling queenside was actually better. And apparently after rook c8, bishop b6, a b6, and king b2, I won't go too deep into this position, but yeah, I mean, I guess like the computer laughs at whatever I'm trying to do as black, but psychologically that castling queenside move, it's very difficult to play in a blitz game. The queenside looks totally open, but the strong central knight plays in white's favor. The lack of open lines for black that they can use effectively, and the fact that the queen and rook are on the wrong side of the board. They should be on the queen side in order to try to make use of the fact that white castled queenside. So castling queenside would defend. In the game, though, he played bishop b6, and this would be a good moment to pause the video and see what black should do. Alright, so I hope you guys had a chance to pause the video there. And as it turns out, bishop take b6 is a blunder. This move loses the game on the spot, and this allows me to execute the blow that I had in mind for a while now. I don't know if it was necessarily this specific blow, but it was just a move to open the king. And so rook take e3. I don't really recall thinking too much about this. It just seemed so thematic. I'm attacking his queen, or I'm sorry, I'm attacking his king with the queen and bishop. Meanwhile, these pieces are just totally misplaced, and the knight can't help, and the rooks are still sleeping. So, king here, check. You can't run this way because after rook e8 check, you can only throw the queen in the way, and if king f2, queen e3, it's going to be mate. And so he played king c1. I took, and knight c2 was played. He could play this, but I think this is just winning for black after this. Rook c8, queen c3, and I could capture this rook and take that rook, but better is to go for this queen versus two rooks position. I have two extra pawns, bishop against knight in an open position with pawns on both sides of the board. Usually plays in favor of the bishop, and white is behind on development, and so after queen f2, one of the chief advantages of the queen versus the two rooks shows itself. Positions where the queen beats the two rooks are usually positions where the rooks are not coordinated and the queen has many objects for an attack. Both of those conditions have been satisfied here. Yeah, in order to beat the queen, the two rooks need to be coordinated, usually focused against a certain point. So white is dead lost here, and yeah. After knight c2, I almost blundered this game. So my first instinct was to play bishop d3, but I just told myself to wait and find a better move. Because bishop d3, after this, all of a sudden white's winning now, after queen c5. And this meets the mate threat very effectively. So I like to teach students this model of thinking. I learned this from the lovely book, Imagination in Chess by Pata Gaprindashvili. Has a bunch of great exercises and models of thinking that can be easily replicated into your own games. And so it talks about a player having an idea, okay? And if that idea works, then that's great, you do it. Well, what if the idea doesn't work? Well, you have to find out what's wrong with that idea and then see if you can make any adjustment to make it work. So if we were to put that into action, bishop d3 looks like a strong move because it threatens checkmate, but white can grab the c-file with queen c5. The queen has access to the c-file. So now that we verbalize the problem, it becomes very clear to play rook c8, bringing the last piece into the attack and taking away the c-file. After bishop c5, bishop d3, white thought for a bit, and he resigned. So totally unexpected victory for me from the ICC Open qualifier 4 years ago now. yeah, I mean, when I found out, I was just thrilled, and this game will forever remain one of my most precious memories. Despite all the rough edges, I think it was pretty cool to beat Magnus Carlsen in this style, even though it only was a blitz game. If you guys like this video, please don't forget to comment and subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be doing some more educational stuff in the future. This is my first video, so I hope you guys like it. Let me know what you guys think. And you can follow me on Twitch. That's twitch.tv/ProfessorDaddy. That will be in the video description as well. And I also make appearances on my friends' streams, Dynamic Chess Inc. and Akash, and we will have those in the video description as well. So thank you guys so much. I hope you learned a little something from this game, and see you guys soon. Take care.